They are available by the middle of next week. The amounts should be available for you online. Be mindful of the fact that the end of the month is a weekend, and so the last day that the office will be open for you to pay is Friday, December 29th, and we close at noon that day for the holiday. So if you would like to pay your taxes in person in advance of the end of the calendar year so that you can take the deduction for this year, do it before noon, Friday the 29th. All right,
Mayor, can I just make one comment on that?
Please.
Just so folks know, you can prepay. The issue of the actual deductibility of a prepaid tax, that's an IRS determination. It's, I'm sure, something that the IRS will be looking at, particularly this year. So while in the past the village has in fact received prepayments, I believe last year was in excess of $300,000, folks can certainly do that, but in terms of the actual deductibility, I just want folks to know that's an IRS determination,
Yes.
not a state determination.
Right, and talk to your tax preparer,
Right.
not your mayor, on the details for that. We're just doing our best to try and give you as many options as possible. And so I'd like to transition into our big agenda item for this evening, and I'll just, before turning it over to Stuart and Debbie and whoever else is going to kick us off, I would just, I see we have a full room of people. Delighted to have so much participation. In order to allow for everyone to have an opportunity to speak, we do have the shot clock set up tonight for 5 minutes. Feel free to take less than 5 minutes, but at the 5-minute mark, we will say thank you very much and ask for the next person to come up and speak. Okay?
Mayor,
Operation
thank you
Council.
very much. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board, village manager, and to members of the public. This is the public scoping session on the draft scope document that has been provided with regard to the Snowden Woods project. A few housekeeping details before we actually get into what's going on tonight. We have a court reporter or a certified stenographer here who will be taking down what folks say, so I would ask that you talk slowly and that you give your name and that you give your address or your place of business. I do have a sign-in sheet here, but if folks who have not so signed in want to speak, they're certainly welcome to do so and address the comments with regard to the scoping session. Just a few things in terms of what we're here for. There was a public notice that was sent out with regard to the draft environmental, to discuss relevant issues as discussed in the draft environmental impact statement in connection with the Snowden Woods project. This was sent out, this was published. The draft scope statement outline has in fact been available. But for folks who are not completely familiar with the scoping process, the state in its seeker handbook notes that scoping is a process that develops a written document which outlines the topics and analyses of potential environmental impacts of an action that will be addressed in a draft environmental impact statement. The purpose of scoping is to narrow issues and ensure that the draft EIS will be a concise, accurate, and complete document that is adequate for public review. The scoping process is intended to ensure public participation in the EIS development process, allow open discussion of issues of public concern, and permit inclusion of relevant, substantive public issues in the final written scope. The scoping process can also allow the lead agency and other involved agencies to reach agreement on relevant issues in order to minimize the inclusion of unnecessary issues. Finally, scoping should help the sponsor avoid the submission of an obviously deficient draft environmental impact statement. And with regard to scoping, the state and its regulations makes clear that public participation, such as a meeting tonight, is of critical importance. As the state notes, in many situations, individuals living adjacent to a project site or individuals familiar with it can identify site characteristics or potential adverse impacts not readily apparent to the project sponsor or lead agency, which in this case is the Board of Trustees. For example, longtime residents may be familiar with seasonal patterns of intermittent drainage systems or past usages of the site. So this is the time for the public to provide public comments with regard to the scoping outline. The public comment period, Mayor, will remain open until the 27th of December, as was published in the Environmental Notice Bulletin, published by the State of New York Department of Environmental Protection. And with that, we can begin. I would first invite up Mr. Joseph Ariol, who represents the sponsor in this case, to give a brief overview, and then we'll start with the public comments.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the board. Thank you for scheduling this meeting. We are excited to be here, get the input from the board, other involved and interested agencies, and members of the public. We too are pleased to see such a good attendance tonight. And I want to reiterate, as Stuart went through the guidelines here, I want to assure the public that the purpose of this session is to hear from you what you want studied in the document that we are now going to go and prepare. We want to know what the local knowledge is about what these impacts may be, these perceived impacts may be. There we hope will be many positive impacts. You may perceive there to be negative impacts, and this is your opportunity to say, please make sure that this or that is included in what you study. It is a 198 unit residential development on Snowden Ave. It also includes a sort of a redevelopment of the firehouse site there at the entrance. And it's our intention to be responsive to the environmental concerns of the neighbors and the public at large. So again, our opportunity to come back and answer the questions you may have is when we submit this document, this environmental impact statement. We've met with other stakeholders in the village, like your affordable housing professionals, your school district superintendent. We expect to continue to meet with them to get their input, the fire department as well, and your consultants. The document that your consultants have put before you and put out to the public is a purposefully comprehensive document that acts like a table of contents for the environmental impact statement, and whatever reasonably should be added from your perspective to that document, we will be pleased to follow up on and provide you responses on. So that's it for us tonight. We're here to listen and to get, as a result of this opportunity, the document that tells us what to go and do. And thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Matt Parrish?
I appreciate the opportunity. I have leave these to be passed around.
I'll be happy to pass it around, sir. Thank you.
Put that in. That's a statement I'm putting in the record. Now I'm going to try to paraphrase it. I don't know. Is there a time limit, Madam Mayor?
Yes, we're asking folks to limit it to 5 minutes tonight because as you can see, there are many people that would like to comment.
Okay.
But you can
Well, it's
certainly
very difficult to cover a scoping document issues and that are complicated. In this case, quite complicated in a few minutes. And I think I'd like to, I don't know how long I need to take to summarize what's in the report. I hope you'll study the report. I'm here, for those of you who don't know, I'm here as planning environmental consultant to Jeff Smith and a number of the neighbors of this project, the proposed project. Anything I say is, I know obviously is in the record and can be reviewed as to whether it's accurate, inaccurate, and whether it is consistent with the regulations. So I'm fully aware of that, and so I'm not going to try to say anything that just happens to favor my client. Now, there's a whole confusion here, and I think this whole scoping document is misleading, it's inaccurate, because it has to be scrapped in its entirety for the following reasons. A full environmental impact statement has to examine a proposed action. Action is something that when the environmental process is finished, the board would then first make a finding as to the environmental impact, and then as to the action itself. They then vote to approve or disapprove. Now, what's the action on the table here? The real action that's been put in by the petitioners, which was neglected to be discussed, is an amendment to the zoning ordinance of the village of Ossining to create a new floating zone. That's what's on the table. If the process is finished, that's what the board would have to vote on, whether to approve an amendment to the zoning ordinance. Not whether to approve this project, but whether to approve an amendment to the zoning ordinance to create this new zone. And the zone is applicable in 5 different zoning districts of the village of Ossining. Now, inasmuch as it is applicable to all of those districts, the scoping document obviously has to look at, study, what are the impacts of imposing this zone, creating this new zone, which allows double density, by the way. That's the whole purpose of the zone, provided the applicant goes to the village engineer and village manager and gets an agreement of some sort, and then goes to the planning board and gets the site plan approval. And that would automatically then allow developers to get double density in a whole bunch of zones of the village of Ossining. This project that they've discussed is not a site plan that required under the code. There's nothing that can be approved here. It's a concept plan. And it has some benefit, surely. It helps when you discuss the zoning amendment, you say, what will it look like? What will it seem when if this zone is adopted? What will the type of projects be that will be in those zones? So to that extent, the particular project concept plan, it's just a general plan that's been put in, is useful and should be looked at. But it should be looked at in terms of that's the type of project that can occur in 5 different zones. Now remember, I'd been told at one of the prior meetings here that I think it was a representative, the applicant said, well, look, it's not going to happen in these other zones. And I don't know how anybody could assure that it won't happen. The criteria is you have to have 10 acres within that zone. You have to have 10 contiguous acres, and you can have 10% of it can be outside of those zones, in fact, under the petition language. So that's how it can happen there. It would not be go back to the board and say, hey, village board, do you agree for the project in this zone, that zone, the other thing? Once the zoning is enacted, it's finished.
Thank
I
you.
didn't make that up. That's the language of the petition. So given that language and given that, the scoping document must then examine the impacts of the creation of zone. That is the action that's before you. Anything else
you.
is,
Madam Mayor,
Please don't interrupt.
I'm next on the list. Can I give him my 5 minutes?
No, we do not yield our time.
He's a professional representing somebody,
well,
and he should be
I-
able to finish himself.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everybody in this room has a valid reason for being here, and we want to hear from all of them. And we have heard from you, sir, and you have provided us with more
do you
information.
want me to
and you've
come
also
back at the end?
Why don't we let the meeting play out? There's a number of people here we'd like to hear
Do you
from.
want to cut me off now?
We're trying to be
Look,
fair and give everybody an
I'm
opportunity.
going to
to
say
ask the
something,
reasons for
Madam
their
Mayor.
thoughts.
I have been working on CEQA projects now for about 40 years. And I've been to many boards and in fact, at one time I was a consultant to some projects in Ossining. And I have never heard a cutoff of a few minutes for a professional comes in talking with the specifics of a project. You know, it just doesn't happen. And it just, to me, is an indication that while the attorney talked about getting public input and so on and so forth, it's not real public input when you cut everybody off. I'm sorry about that. And I'm for the record saying that this is not valid public input.
If I can just make one comment, Madam Mayor. As I'm sure Mr. Parrish knows, in the seeker handbook, it specifically does make reference to time limitations that are provided. So, Mr. Davis, you're up next.
Well, let me just address that, because I spoke with Mr. Kahan, and, you know, we've been appearing at all of the meetings, and there was a 3-minute, you know, cutoff on addressing the issue of, you know, when there's an issue at the beginning of a meeting, and Mr. Kahan said, you will be, he specifically told us that we will have the opportunity to speak unlimited because it is a public hearing. And that is what he told us. I don't know what his response is going to be, but that is what he told us, and I wouldn't misrepresent that to this board. Now, on page 4 of the scoping document, there's a provision. It says, existing conditions, identify and describe land uses within a half a mile of the project site. For purposes of the record, my name is Clifford Davis. I represent Jeffrey and Lynn Smith at 33 Beach Road in Ossining. I am an attorney in White Plains. And then it says, identify the land uses within a half a mile, and then under potential impacts, it says compare the proposed development with existing land uses within a half a mile of the project site. I submit to this board that half mile is completely arbitrary. There has been nothing that has been submitted to this board on any analysis as to why we should have a cutoff of a half a mile. In Mr. Parrish's letter, it stated that perhaps it should be a mile, but I think that this board should do its independent analysis, shouldn't put any mileage restriction. The analysis that this applicant should be required to undertake pursuant to the scope in the draft environmental impact statement is addressing all of the potential environmental impacts as a result of this project wherever they may lie, whether it's at the railroad station or however, going from border to border within the village of Ossining. Now, what Mr. Parrish was trying to explain to this board why this process is tainted is that in the notice it makes reference to a firehouse. When you look at the zoning application, there's no reference to a firehouse. In fact, the zoning application makes reference to some sort of infrastructure that is non-related to the application. There's no firehouse in the zoning application. There has been no site plan submitted to the planning board. The notice also makes reference, and the project action description makes reference to an application before the Zoning Board of Appeals. There has been no application to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So what you have here are references to everything, and the focus is on a site plan, a firehouse, what is the impact of the firehouse. The issue needs to be what is the impact of the zoning amendment. And when you look at the zoning amendment, as Mr. Parrish was trying to explain to this board, there is the potential for at least 5 different districts, if not more. And that has to be fully explored. So I would respectfully request that this board read Mr. Parrish's report in detail, and that there be no limit, no mileage limitation on the environmental impacts that arise from this zoning amendment. And this process should begin anew in a proper fashion. There should be no reference to a site plan, which has not been submitted. There should be no reference to a zoning application, which is not before the Zoning Board of Appeals. The only matter that is before you is a draft, that should be before you, is a draft scoping session on a zoning amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stuart, before we go on, can I ask a question, because I'm a little unclear on something that's been raised, and perhaps somebody can clear it up before we go further. Lynn, you might need to be helpful in this. The zoning districts that this proposal might impact, there's the CCD. CDD, thank
which is
you.
adjacent to the S-125.
So what are the districts that this, because there's 2 that I'm aware of, CDDs.
that's
So
right.
what are the others that this would be amending?
That, well, it's, I viewed it as it was the CDDs and the S-125s, which would be potentially impacted by.
They would be impacted, we're not amending them. We're not at,
What the proposal in terms of the text amendment relates to primarily CDD districts, which are, in this particular case, is adjacent to an S-125 district, which
And-
is where the Beach Road neighborhood.
right,
where
because
many of these
it's
folks
Beach
are from.
Road, and there's a CDD above them and a CDD below them.
Correct.
The proposed text amendment that is included in this is to amend what could be developed in the CDD, the Conservation Development
Correct.
Districts.
That's correct.
Are there text amendments that are being proposed that would change what could be developed in any districts other than the CDD, which is 2 areas surrounding Beach Road.
The reading, you may,
Yes, Madam Mayor, there are 2 districts where the overlay could potentially apply, as it is written in the draft amendment that's part of this application.
No, it's his application, it's different.
It's the CDD and the PW, sorry. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll let Mr. Davis speak for himself, when they refer to other, or Nat Parrish, when they refer to the other areas that ought to be studied, they are not referring to 5 different zones, they are referring to 5 different areas that could comply with the proposed text amendment. And we don't disagree, by the way. But it's 2 zones, potentially.
5 areas, 2 zones.
Correct.
Okay, because PW is planned waterfront, and there's planned waterfront A, B, and C. Is that what we're talking about?
Right. And by the way, that is subject, as we go through the process itself, as you know, alternatives get studied. The zone text amendment is not something that's.
I just wanted to understand
yeah.
what was being referenced, because that was a new way
Right.
of looking at it for me. I wanted to know
Right,
that
and
before we went
it's
on.
not
That's all.
5 districts.
Mr. Parrish?
Yes, I just
wanna
want to
clarify that point?
just so we understand. What's before you is a proposed amendment to create a PDO, Preservation Density Overlay District. And purpose, to incentivize responsible high development in the CDD and PW districts.
Okay.
That's what this whole,
Thank you.
I'm reading from the petition.
Thank
That's
you.
the action before you.
Thank you very
So
much
you
for
look at the
clarifying
map, and wherever you have a CDD and a PW district, this overlay zone would apply to that.
Thank you.
I defy anybody to interpret this any other way.
Thank you for shedding light on that for us. Who's next?
Stephen Kowalczyk?
Hello, I'm Stephen Kowalczyk, and
Say his name, it's okay.
I've lived on Stoughton Avenue since 1987. And the issue I want to address is the is an environmental issue, an ecological issue. The area is a critical avian habitat. I'm a very amateur bird watcher. I've just been doing it for 2 years, and over a period of 1 season in that area, I've seen 55 species of birds, and I estimate that it's probably more like 75 or 80 that use it. It is a nesting area. It is an area that's very critical during the spring and fall migrations. There have been eagles nesting there. I've seen during the fall as many as 20 ospreys in that area. Last winter and fall, last winter and spring, I saw a pair, obviously a mating pair of red-tailed hawks. They probably were mating. And just last week, I saw them return. So this is a very critical area. And I would like to give the board a list of the birds that are in that area.
Thank you.
And I made a book of the habitat of,
How lovely.
of things.
Wonderful, thank you.
There are, besides the birds, there are other animals. I've seen gray foxes. One impact is, there are like things like coyotes and stuff and deer. You develop that area, they're going to go into people's backyards, and because they can be driven out of that. So you'll have, maybe Fluffy or Fido attack, or maybe toddlers Jack and Jill could be mauled. So so I think this is an issue. It's a very critical avian habitat,
Thank you.
and I think that has to be addressed. And I don't see how it can be addressed, actually, but,
Well, you have just raised the concern.
okay.
That's the
Thank you.
point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Carrie Ann Tondo, please.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Carrie Ann Tondo, I'm from the law firm of Ingerman Smith. We serve as counsel to the Ossining Union Free School District. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening on behalf of the school district, who certainly is an interested party to this matter. At the outset, I would like the record to reflect that the superintendent and the members of the board would certainly be present here this evening, except for the fact that they are now conducting their own Board of Education meeting tonight. So I'd ask that the absence should not be noted or construed as their lack of interest or concern on their part. As the village is fully aware, the district generally supports economic development in the community. However, the board and district administration take very seriously any matter that could potentially negatively impact the district, its educational programs, opportunities for its students, its facilities, and overall operations. When a project of this nature is being considered, its impact and those unintended consequences we've talked about in the past must be reviewed and carefully analyzed. The draft DEIS scoping outline suggests that the DEIS will be based upon 2 reports that were completed by Bergman Associates, including the fiscal impact analysis, which was dated in the footnote of February 2017. I note the cover has a different date on it. I submit that the DEIS should be expanded upon, that document, that report, and the DEIS should not be based solely upon that report as it relates to the school district, because at this juncture, it does not appear to accurately reflect the full impact to the school district. Should this process move forward, or as this process moves forward, we respectfully ask that the village require the following areas to be really looked into more deeply and in more detail on behalf of the school district. I'm going to just reference 3 major areas due to the time limitation this evening. I'm going to try to keep it to those areas, but obviously, based on Mr. Khan's statement, the school district will reserve its right to submit additional written comments in more detail up and through the date of the submission of December 27th, I believe you stated.
Right.
So the 3 areas I would just like to hit on briefly tonight, which we would request that you require to be looked at more detailed and analyzed, is first the number of students generated from the project. I don't believe it's any surprise that I would be saying that to you this evening. We've had these conversations on a number of properties as they have come to the forefront over the last several years. 2 and 3 bedroom units generally produce and generate school-age children. The inclusion of affordable housing units certainly further impacts the projected number of students when you do analysis and detailed studies. On that note, we respectfully request that additional studies be undertaken to verify the accuracy of the projected number of students that are now contained in that Bergman report, and to look at the methodologies that are being utilized to determine the projected number of students. I believe that there are additional methodologies to be used that may more accurately portray that amount and predict that amount. Simply stated, unless this is an age-restricted community, it will generate students. And the updated methodologies need to be looked at so that the district and its programs and educational opportunities are protected. Capacity, that's also a topic that we have brought to the forefront of the village over the past several years. The facilities of the school district are at or near capacity. Any influx of students may require additional improvements, capital construction, to be able to fully provide the necessary services for those students. You're also familiar with open space requirements of the district. So as soon as you start adding on capital improvements, additional additions, that depletes any open space for our students to be able to have any recreation activities outside. That is part of an educational opportunity. With respect to capacity, obviously, along with capital construction, it comes at a cost. So we ask that the DEIS fully look at that with input from the district as to what costs and what necessary improvements may be necessary as a result of an influx of students. And the last main area that I just want to briefly address is something that really needs to be looked at in a detailed manner, and that's the financial impact to the district. The district doesn't receive additional revenue stream from a project of this nature. As the board is aware, the mayor is aware, we're bound by the tax cap. It's a very technical budget process that we must follow. So I think that needs to be looked at certainly in more detail to really understand whether or not there is any projected revenue for the district. I submit that it does not provide an additional revenue stream. So in closing, these are the areas that we think need to be focused on. They are not the only areas. We have been speaking to the village. We will continue those discussions. As counsel for the developer said, he has reached out to the school district. We hope to continue that dialogue because we do feel that any type of DIS needs to really address and mitigate any impact to the school district should this project move forward. I thank you again for your time and the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Ms. Tondo.
I have just a question for you, and I don't think it's for you, but it's just a point of clarification. So conversations between the Board of Education or members of the board and the attorneys, are they public or private? So the conversations you're having, are there minutes and records of those conversations, or they're simply conversations?
You may certainly answer it.
I think we are bound by the requirements of the open meetings law. Certainly, there are requirements, and there are also, when you're seeking legal advice from counsel, that's actually an exception to the open meetings law. So it really depends upon what you're asking more specifically. There's a whole area of law under the public officers law that explains that.
Okay, so I'll just ask it offline, because I'm just curious as to what happens. That's why I asked the question, actually. I didn't know where
It all
falls.
depends. It would be very specific, a factually based question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have no one else who has actually signed in. Is there anyone else who wishes to address? Mr. Smith?
Mr. Smith goes to Village Hall.
Want some water?
No, it wouldn't help. I'm Jeffrey Smith. I live at 33 Beach Road. I'm a adjoining property owner for this, for at least one of the proposed overlay districts. I urge the board to pay very serious attention to Mr. Parrish's analysis. I think it's crucial if you want to get this right. If you don't. Secondly, you asked, Madam Mayor, you asked about the history of the area. I'll say something that is maybe only one other person here who's old enough to know this, and I only know it by word of mouth. But there are foundations on that property now from somebody who attempted to develop it some time ago. I've been in the neighborhood for over 30 years, and I think it was before that. The story that I was told by many neighbors who are no longer neighbors, they're neighbors of somebody maybe, but not of Beach Road, is that in the terms of the blasting in that area, that many houses were damaged. I used to own a different house on the block where the swimming pool was cracked from that blasting. So I think one of the things, if you're going to focus on this as a spot zoning kind of a thing, which apparently it is some days and other days it isn't, and that's part of the problem here. There's no goddamn transparency, pardon the language. What's going on here is not open, it's not out in the public. But you may want to ask, in terms of looking at it as a spot kind of a zoning, you may want to ask them to do a subterranean geological analysis, because there may be a piece of shale that runs all across that neighborhood and will cause the same kind of damage again. And the people who live there ought to be protected from that by a study of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board?
It's a learning process for me also. John Zeltzman, 17 Westview Avenue. So what I'm learning here is that this is really about zoning. And when we talk about zoning, we're talking about doing something on a spot basis that has larger ramifications. And that we really, there have been a lot of recommendations from various committees lately that zoning is one of the issues that needs to be looked at comprehensively. So as we move forward, as we have in the past historically, doing micro zoning changes for specific projects, we just keep digging ourselves deeper and deeper into holes. So in a certain way, this project is out of sequence to the planning that needs to happen before such projects can be reasonably evaluated. You know, some of the questions that have not been answered or have not been asked, to my knowledge, are how large a village do we want to have? Do we want it to be a 30,000 person village? Do we want it to be a 50,000 person village? Do we want it to be a city? So that's a question that's never really been asked. We keep growing kind of organically. Sometimes that growth is good, sometimes that growth creates challenges. How much do we want to invest in infrastructure to support growth? That's an open question. I'm not projecting one answer or another, but that's a question that needs to be evaluated and answered so that we can look at things in a more comprehensive way. So I'm not here to advocate one position or another. I'm here to advocate that this village really needs to buckle down and undertake some serious planning. We need to know what we want to become when we grow up. And I think this project is somewhat out of sequence to the planning work that people have been calling for at least 10 years, which has not happened. Thank you.
Before anyone else speaks, I'm glad that you brought that up, Mr. Zeltzman, because one of the major initiatives for the coming year is a comprehensive plan review. And I think it would be helpful for us to understand how that process can be going on at the same time as this process, and where do they overlap, and how do they learn from each other? And I'm asking either Debbie or Stuart to comment on this in any way that can help us understand
One
to a
of
degree
the,
what
I
the
think
questions
one
being
of the
raised.
questions, and I'll defer to Debbie after I finish, although that's usually not what deferring means. It will be to look at exactly what zones in terms of the comprehensive plan we want to look at. It may well be, and I am aware that one of the issues that has been raised by the folks in opposition to this project is that the CDD zone, as now noted, is the least dense zone within the village, and that the proposal does significantly or would significantly increase within that area. And I know that issues have been raised with regard to whether, in fact, the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So certainly one of the issues that I think that would have to be developed as we go into the new year and start looking at this is what do we want to do, first of all, with the CDD zone? We have it for a particular reason. You have your Crawbucky Preserve there. You have a lot in that particular area. And is that something where you now want to put, the development that would be potentially called for should a zoning text amendment go through here? Clearly, as everyone knows, your zoning code has to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. And I think one of the things that will be very important from this board's perspective and the staff's perspective is to review as to whether or not that consistency is here, as well as if it is the view to develop that area, those CDD areas, to the extent that's called for here. And part of that would be through a comprehensive plan review in terms of the CDD district. It's called, Conservation Development District for a reason, and it's an area that certainly the folks on Beach Road are very familiar with, and that becomes very important. So I think that the comprehensive plan review is going to be broader than simply the CDD district, but it clearly plays into what we're considering here tonight, or what we're hearing about tonight, and which will play out over the next few months. And I certainly think that as the process unfolds, particularly as you get, as the developer and the sponsor goes into the EIS stage, what is thought of in terms of the comprehensive plan, and again, specifically with regard to what we're talking about here, both PW and CDD, becomes important. Because again, it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan at the end of the day. So that's something we just have to look at. I'm sorry for a roundabout answer, but
You're an attorney.
I'm an attorney.
I believe the difference between the comprehensive plan update and what is happening here with the environmental impact statement is that there is a proposal for a development on a piece of land, and we do not know at this point how that's going to affect the land and the surrounding areas and the neighborhoods that are beside it. And so going through the process of the evaluation gives us good information, even into the future, about development along the waterfront, a development in large tracts of land. And as we go through the process of evaluating our comprehensive plan, we take another look at how conservation districts are important to our community and whether or not those are things that are something that you would want to continue. And I'm not making judgments on it. I'm just saying that part of the review of the plan is to say, is it appropriate for today and is it appropriate for growth that we may expect in the future? So having them run simultaneously, I do not see any conflicts in that, and I actually think that would give us additional information to be able to consider when we look at the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board with regard to the public scoping tonight? Anyone else? Mayor Knott?
I get a couple more minutes?
Were you about to say something, Stuart?
No, I was, but I'll defer if you want to let Mr.
Yeah.
You want Mr. Parrish.
Mr. Parrish, please, join us again.
Well, let's talk about getting into the next steps. But the question is, what are we evaluating against the comprehensive plan? And I go back to the fact that I ask that you study the petition itself in detail and evaluate whether or not you are in danger, and I think you're not only in danger, fully violating the segmentation requirements that the CEQA regulations impose. You can't conduct a segmented review. Now, just to explain that a little bit, let's assume that you're just focusing on this one project that's been conceptual site plan that's been presented, and just focus on that, and you adopt the zoning ordinance that the petitioner gave you. And that petition deals with 5 different districts, and somebody says, wait a second, you only looked at one. What happened to the other 4? That's segmentation. And I don't have to tell you, I'm sure your attorney will tell you, what happens when the process is finished and there was impermissible segmentation. The findings constituted impermissible segmentations because they did not consider all of the areas that were involved in the particular amendment. I don't think there's any dispute about that. That's sort of clarity. So what you have to go back now in terms of the scoping document is to prepare a scoping document that starts out by saying, we're looking at a zoning amendment. That's what we're looking at. That zoning amendment is illustrative. The site plan that the petition has shown is illustrative of what might happen here. And then you go through all the steps and say, well, okay, generically, not in detail, but generically, what happens in each of these other areas in which this zone automatically becomes active if we enact a zone. And you do that, go through that process now, looking step by step of what happens to you at the end. Because just preparing a statement, the ultimate, as the attorney will no doubt tell you, is a finding statement. And when it comes to that finding statement, you work backwards and say, hey, what problems are we going to have when we have to make this statement? And by the way, that's the point at which legal challenges start formally, is when you adopt the finding statement. So I think benefit to the applicant, benefit to the village, benefit to my client, is not to have to go through all this process and then at the end get the thing thrown out because it was impermissible segmentation. It's not to anybody's benefit. So you really need to go back a step now. I'm suggesting that the scoping And I know you have the 60-day limit and so on. The applicant surely will waive it. It happens all the time. And prepare a scoping document that relates to the action. Again, emphasizing the action is the petition, the specific petition that the applicant has prepared, which attaches a zoning text and a zoning table. That's the action, is adopting that. The action is not whether or not you like the plan that the applicant presented. That's purely illustrative of what might happen. Should you do it, I mean, just look at the picture. If you adopt the zone, what would then happen is the applicant would then go to the village manager and the village engineer and say, hey, I got a plan and I'm going to offer infrastructure that's not related to the thing, and so can I go and produce a site plan for the planning board? And if the village manager and village engineer say okay, then they march off and prepare 22 sheets of paper and exhibits and everything for the planning board to approve the site plan. That's the steps. But the step one your board is looking at right now is the zoning amendment. And it's not really, I don't see it debatable. Now, surely somebody's going to say, well, you can't study all these other areas because you don't know what's going to happen here. You know what they're proposing. The answer to that is, if you look at the CEQA handbook, is there's a provision for doing generic analyses. You create a hypothetical impact. You look at the land uses and the whole thing. In my statement, I give you suggestions for how that can be done, acknowledging that you don't have specific concept plans for other areas. But to look at them, what their impact, what would happen if individually and cumulatively, it all can happen at once and the school district gets killed. So that's, you need to look at all of that. And I don't want to spend all night with you. I'm glad you gave me a few more minutes. But please read my paper carefully. And in point of view as neutral people, not as I know it. Let's be realistic about it. I know there's some attraction from this project because you're going to get a free firehouse. That's always, if I was sitting on the village board, I couldn't ignore it. But then I think of what's the precedent. But I'm not getting into that right now. I'm getting into the fact that there's a process, and you should neutrally look at the situation, what's been presented to you. I don't frankly know who prepared the draft scoping document, who prepared the various descriptions of activities, but you need to look at it neutrally, bring in an outside special counsel and land use experts, anybody, but look at it carefully before you march off to do this thing and it ends up poof. And that's not, and I'm going to say this, I'm a consultant very often for developers. I'd say to the developer, this isn't to your advantage. If they were my client, I'd tell you, you guys are crazy.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish.
Thank you.
It's not often I say thank you to someone who just called us crazy. But I do want to just say that none of this is happening. There's nobody's jumping off to do anything quickly at all. It seems like it's going to be quite a lengthy process, no matter what pathway it goes down. Stuart, did you want to comment on something before? I'm sure other board members have other questions.
No,
and there may be more
whatever
comments.
board members have, I think is fine.
Really? Okay.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board?
Sir.
Please.
Chris Camosa, I live at 31 Beach Road, and obviously this project would occur near me, so I've been following it carefully, but I also have children in the school district, and probably the most important thing we do in this community is to educate our children, and the impact on the Ossining School District can't be overstated, because we are at capacity, and a project like this, it's not that in the first 5 years there might be three new children, but there could be 50 down the road, and we don't know what that will be. And I think it's just clear that in the village of Ossining, the last thing we need is another large development of 196 units. What we need in the village of Ossining is redevelopment of existing infrastructure to improve the quality of life for people of all income classes, not necessarily new development, but redevelopment, redoing of infrastructure. And this is a piece of property that doesn't have access to a road. And they're dangling the prospect of a fire department. And I see all the first responders, and it's wonderful that you gentlemen are here. And I assume that you're here because the prospect of a new firehouse is very attractive, and we probably need one. And I'm sure, I would hope one of you would speak up to that issue, because I'd love to hear your perspective. But this is a piece of property that doesn't have access, and essentially it's a bribe to the village, to the firemen, to get what they want with the piece of property that doesn't have access to a road. So I just urge you to carefully think about this, especially the impact on the schools. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna just make one comment. Totally had me the whole way. The word bribe is utterly offensive to them standing next to you and to the people sitting here. I don't mind all the commentary, and I don't think you meant it that way, but since this is being recorded, I would just say that I'm not sure that that's an appropriate use of the term, both to the first responders standing here and to the people sitting here. So,
Why did you disrespect?
so listen, I'm just gonna go on record, since you did that, that all of what you said is actually, I think, spot on, but I think that point is just offensive.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board this evening on the public scoping? Madam Mayor, since there is no one else who wishes, I would ask the board to entertain a motion to close the public hearing that we're having tonight. The comments will remain open until the 27th of December. People can send those comments either to the village planner, or they can send them to my office, Corporation Counsel, here at 16 Croton Avenue, second floor. And we can get them by the 27th of December, and they will all be considered with regard to putting together the final scoping document. So at this point, I would ask if such a motion would be entertained by the board.
So move.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure before we close the public hearing, there's still a lot of people in the room that have not spoken. If we vote to close the public hearing, you can still write to us, you can still email us, and give us your written comments. But if anybody wants to be heard publicly, have it recorded on television, we're all in the room together, this is your last chance before we close the public hearing portion of this. Anybody who hasn't spoken?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Parrish.
On the assumption that you will prepare a
you speak?
revised
No.
scoping document.
You just stand up. You're gonna speak, you gotta stand up.
It's just a question, probably for the attorney. On the assumption that you're going to prepare some revisions to the scoping document, will those be made available for the public and available for comment before that scoping document is adopted?
I'll have to get back to you and let you know. I don't have the answer right now, but
All right.
I'll be
If
back.
that doesn't happen, then the whole process is,
No, the process is what we're doing now.
yeah, but if it ends now, if you have a revised draft, okay, that revised draft should be the subject of some comment before it's adopted, because otherwise you're adopting a document that's different than the one we talked about.
Understood, and that's why we have the public hearing and get the comments. Thanks.
Okay. We have a motion on the table. Does somebody want to, did somebody move?
So
Moved? You second?
Yeah, I mean,
Did anybody want to comment before we vote on this?
Yes.
Oh, please, Manny.
Just random questions, I guess. It was some comments made in regards to documents not being proper file with our planning department or to the village in regards to the site plan. So I would like to ask Lynn if any of the site plans that were submitted were available online, so public can actually see what the scope of the work is, or any documents that we have on our record.
Hi, how are you? Good evening.
Lynn Brooks Avni is our village planner.
They've submitted a text amendment for the start. The applicant has submitted a text amendment. The text amendment is a proposal before you. There is no site plan yet for the text amendment. You guys have to make a determination. That's what they're going back for.
Okay. But we do have documents under the SECRA on
On the webpage.
on the
yes.
webpage. Okay. So
She just told you the opposite.
What are the documents that are available now for people to see relevant to today's public hearing?
Everything that's, we have, on the secret web page, we have their text, the proposed text amendment. Excuse me, we have their EAF that was submitted. We have the all the correspondence from the opponents. We have all of the scoping document. We have the advertisement of the scoping hearing. I'm trying to like visualize it in my head. Oh, thank you.
That's all on the web, right?
Yes.
You said this is on the secret
yeah.
documents page, which is part of
Yep.
under the planning department on the village
There's
website.
several correspondence. There's the PowerPoint presentation that the applicant has presented to the board back in August. There's a draft letter to the planning board before their presentation to the planning board. Letters back and forth from the opponents to the planning board, to the board of trustees. There's the E&B notice that was filed. And that is the list, essentially, a long list.
Yeah. Okay, so folks,
everything that's, pretty much everything that's in the file is online, except for, I think the big plans are available in most offices to look at, but they're too large to scan.
So,
Not
so
right
is,
now.
if I may, so is it possible for, and when you said the big plans, we're talking about,
They have small PowerPoints of the same plans.
okay,
like
when
if you
we're
want to
talking
see
about
large
when we're talking about the site plan, we're talking about some elevations, we're talking
have
about
a-
some floor plans.
They have concepts of that,
Correct.
yes.
So, is it safe to say that they can provide us, the applicant can provide the village with PDF documents, sure?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
so
very
if they do that, of the site plan, of the concept of the floor plans and everything else that they have already, and they have brought those documents in front of us at some point of time, so is it safe to say that they can put those documents could be part of this
They are.
information?
They're part of the
They're already
PowerPoint.
a part
They're
of it?
part of the PowerPoint
Which,
right now.
because I went through all the documents a few minutes
Should be
ago and
part
I
of
couldn't find
the
that plan.
E22 PowerPoint should have it. Sorry. The link was available before. So they have the presentation they made
The
here.
presentation, yes, I saw the
With the
presentation, but the presentation only has an aerial color site plan and doesn't really have a floor plan or a formal site plan, so to speak. So
well, I
I
think
want to be clear, though, if I may, just, Mayor, I apologize. Trustee Casada, using the term site plan, I think, as Ms. Brooks, there has been no formal site plan
Correct.
submitted
Correct.
here.
But-
There were plans that were made part of the text amendment, which are part of that application.
I haven't seen those plans in our site
It's
though.
it's
then-
that spiral bound book has.
No, but I'm talking about the documents in here. So if I'm in the public and I want it, if I'm,
If it's not there now or it's not showing, we
I-
can go back and double check and add it if it's.
And
not
if you
there.
need anything from the applicant in that regard, we're happy to provide it.
I just think all the documents that have come in front of us the past year should be part of this link, so public or people in the community are aware of what the scope of the project entails.
I will deliver the disc that I have to planning. It will just get uploaded, which is the entire text amendment with all of the attachments to it, so that will be there.
So I agree that anything that can be made available should be made available, but I also want to just clarify, then we talk about what the scope and the impact would be, you know, if it's the bedrooms over here and the bathrooms over here,
That's
pretty irrelevant. We're
correct,
talking about,
correct.
you know,
No,
you know, numbers of
obviously
bedrooms kind of
that's why
things, yeah.
at some point of time, it should be for reference only or for proposals,
Right.
concept ideas, whatever that case may be. But I think it's essential that those documents are available here. You know, when we refer it to 198 units, you know, I would like to see what that means, you know, so.
Mr. Camosa, did you want to speak?
Yes, just one more. So if a site plan is filed, does that mean that public discussion is closed after tonight?
A site plan filing would be a different part, it would be a different step in the process. That would be if it was going
So
through
there'll
the
be other
planning process.
opportunities for members of the public to comment on what's actually going to happen on the property? Okay.
Many.
Many, many, many. This is early in the conversation.
Yeah, long process.
We've done text amendments in the past to our comprehensive plan, and they're usually little things like changing the definition of what is an artisan workspace, because there's new kinds of entrepreneurs, and we want to encourage business. That's a nice little text amendment. That's an easy thing to do and not controversial. this is a much bigger ask to be in the form of a text amendment. And obviously, nobody's questioning that there would be environmental impacts. So this is a process that we're all undertaking very seriously, and I'm grateful to see so many individuals and groups represented. We have the fire department, a number of members are here. We have neighbors, we have the school district, we have the press, we have the planning board, we have people faces I've never seen before. Welcome, so glad to have you here at a village board meeting. This is very early in the process. There's absolutely no decision-making that has been made, and there are no site plans. It wouldn't be the appropriate time for them to be submitted. What we have now is an idea of what is being proposed to potentially be ever developed in any of these potential districts that currently do not allow this kind of development. There's obviously a particular proposal that has sparked this conversation, and that's what Joe Ariel is here and has brought to us in concept for the village to consider. So I really do appreciate so much of the participation that we've had. And I see a hand raised. Yes, Ms. Klapkowski, you are both a neighbor and a member of the planning board. If you would please speak at the microphone so folks at home can hear you.
Yes, sure, and I'll be loud.
They can't hear you on television at home, I'm sorry. It's not me, it's the,
Bring a mic to her, maybe.
and I'm sorry that we can't bring it to you.
All right. Have you gotten a definite answer that the sewage treatment plant can accommodate all these additional bathrooms and water facilities? Also, have you checked with the water department to see if they can supply sufficient water to these buildings? It can be a problem.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We have a motion
Yes, you
that's
do.
been seconded on the table. We haven't voted yet, so we are about to vote and close the public discussion.
This public discussion.
You can still write to us, you can still email us, but as soon as we vote, we're not going to have this conversation about this public hearing. Okay. All in favor of closing this public hearing discussion? You would take written comments till the 27th. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
We have nothing further. This part of the hearing is closed. We have nothing on our agenda at this point, so.
I did just want to comment, I see that this part of the discussion is over, but we do have a couple of housekeeping items that we want to bring up while we're here in session, in public session. Debbie, I see you have in front of you a really terrific program. We want to make sure everyone is aware of it. Do you want to give us the details?
Well, there's only one of them, so somebody just has to hold them up for the camera.
Here we go. Got it? All right.
Got it.
And it's the Ossining Bucks program. What can you tell us about it, Debbie? If you're going to leave the room, please do so as quietly as possible while we're finishing up the meeting.
So this is a very exciting program between the village and the chamber. It is a coupon program that allows and invites.
Excuse me, Debbie, I'm sorry. If you'd like to have conversation, please don't do it in this room while we're still having a public meeting. Thanks, Debbie.
Sure.
Sorry for interrupting.
So just back up and start over. This year, the village board decided not to bag the parking meters and to use the money that we would normally collect to incentivize people from all around the areas to come into our local community and shop. And so we have just developed this Ossining Bucks program that Rika brought to us in a discussion, and the board agreed to, and it is a program where you can get a coupon for $5, and there are going to be participating businesses throughout the community, not just downtown, but also through 133 and up Highland Avenue. So wherever there's a business, if you see this Ossining Bucks poster in a window, they accept the coupons, and you can go in there and make a purchase and use the $5 and get $5 off your purchase. And so it's a pretty exciting program. The chamber is out distributing the Ossining Bucks. I can tell you, here's one of the bucks here.
Oh, good, I
Pass
haven't
that
seen them
down.
yet.
So each of you get a packet of bucks to start to hand out. So there will be some Austining bucks at the community center. You can pick them up here. I know there will be various people out in the community passing them out to local shoppers and residents, and then you can also get them at the chamber office. So it's a first-year program, and we're very excited about it. The whole idea is to bring people into our community during the holidays and to help our businesses.
We are very excited.
It's nice.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
And I just, while we're in public session, I had sent that email out to the board. We've been asked to support a letter that Riverkeeper has asked us to support, and it's something that I think is consistent with our general beliefs and policies, and it was reviewed by Corporation Counsel. Did I get support on
Yeah.
that? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anything else? Do we have
I just need to I didn't hear you say it, you might have, so I apologize. It's a partnership also with the Chamber of Commerce. Quintel Bazemore is a liaison to them, and the whole board immediately voted. So, availability of both coupons and a merchant, if you want to be involved, please contact either Village Management or the Chamber and be a part of this program, which we hope will succeed and will continue in the future.
Very excited. All right, so we have a motion to go into executive session for matters of personnel related to specific persons.
So moved.
Yeah,
Question about the Austining bucks?
Oh,
sure.
sure.
We're pretty loosey-goosey tonight, but please come to the microphone so folks at home
Yeah.
can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't comment on the other, but I'm Greg Rooney, 35 Beach Road. I think your Austining bucks sounds like a great idea. The thing that comes to mind for me is, how do you get this information out further than just individual people passing things out? How do you have a greater impact in Westchester to bring people in here to actually have an impact? It's a great start, it sounds like, but
Right.
how do you actually move it bigger than this plan? Can it be, I don't know, published somewhere, online? I mean, how are you distributing the information to help our businesses?
Jamie?
Come on, Jamie.
Hi, sorry. So we actually did a constant contact today to just over 8,000 people that are all over the county.
Okay.
So that they know about it, and.
Who's on the constant contact list?
It is people that have signed up for it. It's people in our web blast, different people in different municipalities as far as other mayors, other boards, and so on. It's just a list that's built along the way.
And bucks are sent out to them, or how do people get
No,
the
the bucks
bucks?
are through, the board has them, then they'll also be in the clerk's office.
Right, but I mean, that's a very small,
Yeah, so
finite.
here's the thing, though, we did this, this is the first one.
Right.
So
It's a pilot.
most of us have learned in business that you don't roll out to a huge group on day one, something new. We're testing with people that it's manageable. If it succeeds, we can do it again next year in a much bigger way, but we have to sort of manage where we are. And 8,000 plus all of us are sending it to our mailing list and making it available to probably the contiguous, Croton, Austining, Croton, Tarrytown, the areas that many of us reach. And once we know it works, I think we can do it again. But to test it out, it's really the first one out, and at least I am not aware of another village doing it or a town.
Well, I think it's a great idea.
So
I'm
we
just
don't have
just
the
wondering, it's
ability
a
right now to guess how
springboard,
it'll
yeah.
work and what some of the catches might be. So let all your friends know. Let them know to call the chamber or the village manager and get them.
Okay.
But they could just stop by. It's at the community center, the library,
Oh,
Village
sorry,
Hall,
yeah.
and the chamber office. You can come and pick
merchants
them
have
up.
them, too,
But also,
And the merchants have them.
Okay.
Yeah.
but also on the Facebook page for the Village of Austining, you can share that, and it can go out more broadly. Yeah, so it's already been posted on Facebook, so you can take it and share it. It can go into Austining Moms and so on. Yeah,
Right.
for where to pick up the coupons and for the merchants. And
Let's
as
hope
soon as
this
we
is a
have that
great start
list,
then,
we'll
right?
upload it.
And you have your first one.
I just was given.
Yes.
Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Good luck.
Okay, all right.
You're the
Thank
first
you.
one.
Go use it.
All right, so with that, I say thank you very much. Did we ever vote?
Didn't vote on the motion to.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to go into matters, to go into executive session to discuss matters of personnel related to specific persons. We had a motion, we had a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, with that, I say, Thank you very much for joining us. Next week, we have an unusual location. We will be on 9A at the Operations Center. We are going to begin at 7 o'clock doing a walk around the building, but then we're going to transition at about 7:30 to have our work. It's going to be an unusual work session where we're going to discuss all of the buildings that the village owns. And we own many, many buildings, and they're in varying states of looking forward to improving them. So we look forward to learning all about that. And that will be our last major scheduled board meeting for the year. So with that, I say thank you very much.
We also
Yes?
it would also be a partial legislative session.
Of
we
course.
have, no, because we have some local laws to pass.
Oh, yes, I love passing local laws. Excellent. All right, thank you very much.
Sure we have
Looking
money
forward
to
to that.
disperse as
And we
well.
probably have money to disperse and bills to pay. All right, with that, this meeting is adjourned to executive session. Good evening.